You know, agriculture remains a key component of economic development, not only here in Kenya, but in Africa. I mean, when you look at this sector, I mean, its contribution to Kenya's GDP is almost 25%. And so this is a critical sector when you look at it. And of course, it has been facing many challenges from climate change, funding cuts, and of course, outmoded technologies. And so the question is, how do we move agriculture forward? Well, Martin Susan is the Managing Director of Moving Frontiers. Is now joining us here. He has worked in the agriculture value chain for a long time, not only here in Africa, in Kenya, and of course in Netherlands as well. And so he has an idea of how to develop the agriculture sector. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Susan.
Martin.
Martin, well, let's call you Martin. Help us understand, if you were to define the challenges facing this critical industry, how, in three words, how would you describe it?
Well, I probably need more than 3 words, but I'll keep it very short.
Yeah.
Right? I came to Africa 17 years ago, and I came to Mozambique to set up an agricultural bank. And 17 years ago, we talked about the same issues we talk about today. And it's almost like the drama of agriculture and agriculture finance in Africa. And my take is, you know, if you look at countries like Colombia, Turkey, Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, we never talk about agriculture as something that is difficult to finance. So obviously there are a few things that we need to discuss and that now need to change. The time is there.
What is that?
All right. So if you would ask anyone, what is the problem with agriculture? Most people will say it's access to credit, access to finance. If only we had finance, you know, the region would grow very, very fast, or the sector would grow. But actually it's a lot more than that. It's coordinated planning, right? It's value chain integration. It is finance, and not just access to finance, but also the cost of finance is very important. You cannot finance agriculture at double-digit interest rates. But let's be totally honest, to an extent it's also a lack of ambition, right? Kenya is a country of smallholder farmers. That's in our genes, right? And that will be for
90% of our farmers.
Absolutely.
Are small-scale farmers.
And they're very important for the economy. But to drive food security going forward, we also need a different segment of highly competitive, highly commercial farming that can scale and that can produce quality at low cost.
Look, you see, when you look at, for example, countries like India, I mean, you know, about 30 years ago, they were going through challenges of agriculture like we are doing today, but they came up with agricultural Marshall plans, you know, that have managed to allow them to move from food insecure nations to food secure countries. That has been the aspiration of many African countries. Why are we not achieving this? Are we putting our money where our mouth is, or what is the challenge?
Well, that's a very good question. And I wish I had one concise answer for you. But to start with India, the transformation of India has been, I think, astonishing. But in the area of finance, India did something that we sometimes talk about, but, you know, it's controversial. India came with a policy called mandatory priority lending, essentially telling banks to act in a concerted effort, and banks were required to finance X percentage of their loan portfolios in agriculture. And it didn't have to be farmers. The agri-food systems are very complex and very deep and very diverse. I mean, banks can also finance processors, can finance aggregators, logistics, exporters. But everybody played a role in India to play their part and build the sector in a sustainable manner. And that is something we can draw inspiration from.
Look, every year, I mean, you have billions of shillings, you know, and especially here in Kenya, going to fund agriculture projects, you know, irrigation, innovation, extension services, and so much. And this has been the trend since Kenya gained independence back in 1963. And so why then would we still be discussing the issues of funding as a challenge to agriculture, really?
Yeah, I think what is needed, and I think let's step back one moment and sort of recognize that the world as we knew it until 2 months ago doesn't exist anymore. right? We're in a period of high geopolitical uncertainty, and it's now Africa, time to stand up, build Africa, buy Africa. But why are we still talking about that? I think what we now need to do is a joint national forum, a public-private sector forum. And I'll tell you a little bit in a moment about what we're doing with the FINAS 25 conference we're organizing. But we need an ongoing forum, a dialogue, to solve the issues that we have agreed to solve as part of the Kampala Declaration back 2 months ago. Right? And that is to increase productivity by 50% over the next 10 years, to tackle the area of post-harvest losses, to think about nutrition, and a whole range of other things. The time has never been better to now act and come together.
I like that desire, but when you look at the factors that are prevailing, I mean, post-harvest losses, about 25% of all foods harvested in Africa, they go to waste through post-harvest losses. When you look at production, it has declined by almost 20% in the last 10 years because of climate change. So how are you going to turn this around?
By working together. And I'm so happy that you bring up post-harvest losses, because that is something I've been talking about for so many years. Not only me, and now even the Kampala sort of declaration talks about post-harvest losses. Now, post-harvest losses across different value chains are in the region of 30%. That is to cry about. So what I would like to see is that we would somehow declare, maybe under the leadership of the Ministry of Agriculture, the year of post-harvest loss reduction. And that means a whole range of activities involving banks, financiers, lenders, farmers, processors. Get the best brains together that we have and say, look, we're not going to solve this within 12 months. But the agenda is that over the next 3-4 years, we're going to halve post-harvest losses by 50%. And we won't talk about 30% by the end of, say, 2030. But we have maybe something in the region of 10-15%. That is the quickest win, and it's absolutely doable. But we have to work together.
And it has to be deliberate.
It has to be very deliberate.
You talked about, the changing geopolitics. And, when you look at the US, I mean, President Donald Trump has suspended funding to many programs, and agriculture has been badly hit by this. When you look at the European Union, they are also cutting their development support to Africa in many sectors so that they can consolidate their military financing. How bad is the situation?
It's obviously not good. And if we look at the American situation, the sector that's been most affected by the suspense or the withdrawal of US aid is probably the medical sector, and not even the agricultural sector. And that is very, very sad. That day would come one day, but that it would come so abrupt and so unorganized, that's to cry about. Agriculture has also been affected, but a little bit less so. In the area of NGO funding and smallholder support, US aid has been very important, has been instrumental in many areas. If I follow sort of social media and what people are actually saying about sort of the situation that Kenya faces now, it's actually much more resilient and much more optimistic than I could possibly have hoped for. I think the underlying trend is, all right, this is a fact. The private sector will have to move up. It's time to act, right? And there are many, many ideas now being developed to sort of fill that void that the donors are leaving behind. But I do not think that the old days are coming back. We live in a new normal, and we have to get adapted to that.
I mean, look, for anybody involved in progressive planning, I mean, it was evident that the era of begging bowls, we must come to an end at some point, and that's why in 1995, the Malabo Declaration, talked about increasing funding to agriculture to about 10%. When you look at African countries, the average is 3.54%. What then do they need to do really to get out of this cycle of begging and finance agriculture to feed their people?
All right, now that's a question I really like very much. So what essentially you're saying is, if you would portray a graph, you would say agriculture as part of GDP is anywhere between 25 and 30%. But if you look at the loan portfolios of banks and microfinance institutions, and you add them all up, then banks would not finance more than 3% of their loan book in agriculture. 3-4%. That's the common thinking. Now, that's been the narrative for many, many years, as long as I've lived in Africa. And I even helped to build that narrative 10, 15 years ago. But we need a new narrative, because A, we actually really don't know to what extent the financial sector finances agriculture. If you look at statistics, there's one line in annual reporting, and it says, I think, forestry and agriculture X%. But nobody knows exactly where that funding is going. To what value chain is it going? Is it going to dairy? Is it going to mango? Is it going to fish farming? Is it going to forestry? We don't know. And we also don't know which part of the value chain actually do receive funding. Is it smallholders, or is it cooperatives? Is it processors? Is it exporters? So what a number of people are now actually thinking about is that we need to tackle this problem of data first and foremost, right? And at present we're working on something called the loan classification system, which means that every loan booked by a bank or a microfinance or a SACCO gets a little tag saying exactly what it is, what sector it belongs to, what value chain and what actor. Once we have that data, now we can really start to think, okay, now how much is going to agriculture? How big is the problem? Is it 3%? Is it 8%? Is it 12%? Because something doesn't gel. Because if it's 3%, how can it be that we still eat every day, right? This problem of data we need to fix first. Now, once we have fixed that, and mind you, this is not something we do in 12 months. This could be a 5-year project. Yeah. Then we can have an informed dialogue about how we can boost financing to the agricultural sector.
You come from a country that has some of the best agricultural systems in the world, Netherlands. It's a major producer of dairy products. Kenya is also a major producer of dairy products in Africa. It's one of the big three in that league. What do we need to learn from Netherlands that we can apply here to improve some of our agricultural value chain, like the dairy subsector?
All right, now my fellow Dutchmen are not going to like for what I say right now, but I will say it anyway: do not copy the Dutch model. Be inspired by it, but Holland has driven agriculture production to an industrial scale, right? A very small country, a number times the size of Kiambu, and I think we're the 3rd largest exporter of agricultural produce in the world. But the cost has been very high to the country in terms of ecological considerations. But you can be inspired by the technology that Holland has developed, and the way we approach agriculture from many different aspects. And I think you do that. There's a lot of cooperation between academia in the Netherlands, the agricultural business schools, farmers that help here, seed producers. So there's a lot going on. But in the end, Africa is Africa and Kenya is Kenya, and you chart your own way. And we have brilliant people here who will succeed in doing that. Yeah.
So what is the motivation of Mr. Martin leaving Netherlands to come to Kenya for 17 years, leave your banking career to come and get in the muddy field of agriculture?
Oh, that's the best decision I ever took, was coming to Africa. So I came to Africa 17 years ago to start a bank, first in Mozambique, and then I moved to Malawi and worked there for a few years, and then to Uganda, and then finally, about 12 years ago, I came to Kenya. Africa is a fantastic place to be, right? And many people will agree with me who come here and will never leave anymore. It's the people, it's the vibrancy of society, it's the skills levels, it's the education, it's the general optimistic outlook on life. But the biggest thing from a business point of view, there is so much opportunity still here to build country, Kenya especially, from a lower middle income country to a much higher middle income country. This is where you want to be the next 20 years.
You see, when you look at Africa, I mean, it has a lot of fertile lands which is yet to be utilized. It has some of the biggest rivers in the world, you know, River Nile and others. It has lakes. It has oceans. It has rainforests. And the climate conditions are very favorable for farming. Why are we still then hungry as a continent? Why are we food insecure?
Well, that's a good question, and I'm not completely sure how food insecure you are, but certainly in many sectors of society, you're certainly not rich. You could be a lot richer than you are, actually, right? I think I come back to what I said in the beginning. It's a lack of coordination. It's a lack of value chain planning. It's a lack of finance that we talked about already before, that we have to address in a much more systematic way. And above all, I repeat it, it's a lack of ambition. We must not view agriculture as a last resort, whereas we really cannot find employment in any other sector, we can still start our shamba and do that. No, agriculture is business. Agriculture means business. And I think you can make a very, very profitable life by building your food system.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. In the interest of time, before I let you go, tell us about the conference which is happening.
Okay, the conference is called Finance 25. Finance stands for Financing Agri-Food Systems Sustainably. We started that last year in 24, in I believe, March. And now we're going to repeat it towards the end of May. It was an astounding success last year because we brought together over 1,000 sort of representatives for 3 days from government, from the farming sector, from banks, from investors, from lenders. And the idea behind Finance is really driving a dialogue towards financing agriculture in a different way and a more sustainable way. The time has never been right. On behalf of the entire conference organization committee, I would say everybody who would like to get involved, get involved. Contact us through Finance 25 on our website or our social media handles. It's going to be a fantastic event by the end of May, 2 days this time, and the interest is already sky high.
Very good. Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Martin, for swinging by and, of course, for helping us with those technical inputs. And, of course, let's keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here tonight.
Very good indeed.
Thank you.
And we've been talking to the Managing Director of Moving Frontiers, Martin Susan, joining us here to help us understand the challenges facing the agriculture sector and how to deal with them.